Hello, today we will be creating a complete combat system. We will go over step by step how to create these player attacks as well as the bat enemy attacking the player, and both the bat and player can be defeated. This is part 4 of the tutorial series where we will be covering this exact hack and slash game step by step in Godot 4. If you have any questions regarding errors, understanding, or anything at all, then please let me know in the comments and I will be sure to get back to you. Remember that this course is completely free, but if you want to help support me a little more, then a link to my Patreon page will be in the description. Your support truly means the world. Thanks, and remember to subscribe and drop a like to help YouTube push this tutorial and this entire series to more aspiring game developers. And now let's begin. Okay, so we're gonna start off this combat episode and combat video tutorial step by step on creating our player attack, right? So we're gonna go through creating our player attack. How are we going to decide what attack our player is gonna do? Because we're gonna have 2 different buttons, but we're gonna have 3 different attacks based on different scenarios that the player could be in. So that's what we're gonna first set up. Then we're also going to set up the enemy receiving damage, because every attack from the player is going to be doing different damage, and we're going to decide that within the player so that this is going to be modular with every enemy that we have. So let's say we wanted this and then a frog like we're going to do later. Well, we're not going to have to change the player to damage the frog, right? So everything's going to be the same. And then we're also going to create, like I said, our bat enemy, where he's going to be able to receive damage. He's going to play an animation, he's going to be able to die, and he's going to disappear from the map with a dying animation where he falls to the ground, sits there for a little bit, then he's going to disappear, right? So we're going to go through both of these today, and then we're also going to go through the bat attacking the player, and we're going to go with the player taking damage and the player being able to die as well. So, okay, let's get started. This is going to be a pretty in-depth, pretty complex episode. So I want to get started with our player and inside of our player script. So inside of our player script, as of now, we don't really have much. We have some animation, we have some movement, and that's almost basically all we have. We're going to need some different things to control our attacking, right? So we're going to create 3 new variables right now. Well, we're really going to create 2 variables, but I saw something whenever I was getting ready for this episode, and I saw that, well, what we're doing now doesn't really make much sense, right? So, okay, so first we're going to have an attack type, right? We'll decide that. And then we're also going to have a variable, which is going to be a bool variable, which is going to be a current attack, right? And then we can set that to a boolean, and we'll set this later. For now, we can set it in the ready function, and we can just say that this is going to be are we in a current attack, right? So is our player currently attacking? Well, off of spawn, that's going to be set to false. So we can set it to false for now, just so it's set to a value. And then for what I want to go over is I want to go over down here. I want to go over our weapon equipped. What we're doing here doesn't really make much sense because we can't access this weapon equipped variable anywhere else within our script, right? And right now we need to access it within our physics process so that we can kind of check if our player is doing this action or this action and what animation that we want to call for our attack, right? If we are in an attack. But right up here, our script has no idea if we're in the weapon equipped state or not. So we can basically copy this, and then we can paste it up here and create a brand new variable for it. And then we can remove it from down here, just like this. And then we can come up here into our physics process and we can call it, right? So we can up here set this to a boolean value. So we can say, okay, well, this is a bool variable. And we can set it right here in our physics process by saying weapon equipped is going to equal into our global.weapon equipped, right? So that's what it's going to equal. So we can set it, every single frame will set it based on whatever scene we're in. So it updates. And as of now, everything is going to work just like it did in the last episode. Everything's going to work when we first started this episode because we haven't really made a change. But we're about to make our first change, and we're going to come down here into our physics process. Let me zoom in a little bit so we can have a better, so you can see it better, hopefully. And then we're going to come down here and we're going to create an if statement within our script, right? Then we're going to access our weapon equipped function, and we're going to say, okay, well, if our weapon equipped and our current attack is not true, so if there is no attack and our weapon is equipped, then we're going to check for input, right? So we're going to say, okay, well, is our user hitting a button and wants to start an attack? And if that is true, then we can kind of say, well, what 2 buttons are we going to want to do? Well, we can say input that is action just pressed, and then we're going to create 2 more in the input map in just a minute, but we'll say left mouse for now. And then we can say or input dot is action just pressed, and then we can say right mouse just like so. And then let me zoom out so you can see this whole line. And then we can go, okay, well, if this is true, right, our current attack is equal to false and our weapon equipped is equal to true. So we have a weapon out, but we're not attacking. Then we click a button that is going to be one of our attack buttons. Then we can say, okay, well, let's make current attack equal to true. So we can't keep calling this in a loop, right? So we can say, okay, well, current attack is going to equal true. So then it stops this function from looping, so it's not going to check for input anymore. Let's check what our player just did. Did our player do a left mouse or do a right mouse? So if our player does a left mouse, then we want to play our attack type, which is going to be our single attack type, right? So it's going to be a single swing of the sword. So we can say action just pressed, left mouse, and we are on the ground, right? Because if we're not on the ground, then we want to play a air animation, which is going to be our player coming towards the ground. So we can say, okay, well, if we click left and we're on the ground, then we want to say attack type is going to equal single. It's going to be a string. And then we can say else if input dot, we can kind of copy this because it's going to be basically the exact same line of code. Else if input is right mouse, because if we click the right mouse, then if we're on the ground as well, then we want to say, okay, well, our attack type this time is going to be double, right? So equals double. And then, whoa, okay, hold up. Double, just like that. And then we can say one more, which is going to be an else. And then this basically means, okay, well, we're probably not on the ground because our input is left and our input is right. But if it doesn't go within these two if functions, then that means this has to be what's false because, well, it would have went through one of these if we're on the ground. So if we're not on the ground, we can just say else attack type equals the air, right? Boom. Okay, and then we can call a animation that is going to handle whatever our attack type is. So we'll have to create this, but we can say handle, just so we have visuals. We can say handle attack animation, and then we can say attack type. We'll pass through our attack type so we know what animation that we want to play, so everything comes together, right? So basically, this is going to decide what attack we're going to use based on what button we click. So it's going to show different animation on the screen. It's going to look different. It's going to take a different amount of time. It's going to deal a different amount of damage, and we'll decide all that within this attack animation here, right? So, or within this handle attack animation function that we're about to create. So real quick, I want to go and create a damage zone before we create this function. Well, I guess we can create this function now because it is giving us an error. So we can copy this, come down here, and create this function. We can say function attack, and then we can pass that. So this is going to be our attack animation, and this here, as you can see, is our handle movement animation, right? Okay, but what I want to go do is I want to go to our scene, and I want to go up here to our player, and I want to add in an area 2D. And this area 2D is going to be, it's going to basically check for if there is an enemy within our area, right? So we can say this is our deal damage area. So if there's an enemy in this zone, then we're going to want to deal damage to that enemy, right? So then we can add to this a collision shape 2D, and we can make this a circle, and we can add it about this size and about right here. So if we go to our animated sprite, we play our double attack, you kind of see where it passes through. Our air attack, it passes through, and our single attack here, it passes through as well. Maybe we need it a little bit more out, just like this, but that looks good, right? Okay, so now I want to go into our script again, and we actually want to create an onReady var for this so we can get our deal damage zone. So we can say, okay, well, onReady var, and we can name this deal damage zone equals our deal damage zone, just like that. And then we'll end up using this a little bit later when we need to turn this collision on and off, because we don't want to be able to look for enemies all the time, only when we are during, like, in the middle of a animation. So now we need to create our handle attack animation down here. But before I want to do this, I want to go over a couple things. So if we are handling attack animation and we're going to be in the middle of an attack, well, we have to change up something here in this movement animation function, because if we look at this, well, if our weapon is equipped and we're on the ground and we have no velocity, well, we're going to play weapon idle, but we don't want to play weapon idle if we're in the middle of an attack. So to fix this, we can say, okay, well, if is on floor and not current attack, then we can check for the idle and run animation, right? And then else if is on floor and not current attack, then we can play the fall animation. Because if we're in the middle of an attack, then we want to play the air animation, the air attack animation, right? So that's just going to not play our fall, run, and idle if we're in the middle of an attack, so it doesn't interrupt it. But now down here in our handle animation, our handle attack animation, we can go over some stuff and kind of figure out how are we going to play an animation. Well, we already know what animation we need to play. Now we just need to play it. So we can say something, and it's going to be pretty simple because we already know what animation we need. We can say something like weapon, if weapon equipped, then we can say if current attack. These are just double checking to make sure everything's correct, right? Just so we don't have any bugs. We can say var animation. We can create our animation, and our animation is going to equal something. So the reason I named up here these strings by single, double, and air, if we go to our animated sprite, you can kind of see double, single, and air. So it's basically the exact same as the very beginning. Then we have underscore attack behind all of them. So we can make this modular in the script by going and saying, well, okay, var attack, we want our attack. What attack do we want to play? Well, it can be a string of our attack type, right? And then pair that with attack, right? So then if we end up making it, if we come down here and we print animation, just like this, we can print it, and you're going to see that if we go to our stage level, we click play and we click on a button, it should, maybe because we have some sort of error, we're not calling this or something. We come up here, we can go into our if equipped and current attack is not true. So current attack is not true. Weapon should be equipped, right? Okay, so we're gonna have some sort of error. We can see, okay, so we haven't called our left mouse and right mouse. So to do that, we can go to project settings, input map, and we can create some new actions. So we can say, okay, well, right mouse, which is going to be our right mouse button, is going to be equal to our right mouse button. And then our left mouse is going to be equal to our left mouse button, just like that. And then if we go to our stage level and we click play and we look into the output, you can see that, okay, well, if we click that button, it's going to play our single attack. Now, we're not going to be able to play another attack animation or another animation at all because we never go back and we never reset the loop. And you can kind of see everything's broken, but that is only because we never went and changed current attack to equal false again, right? So it's still equal to true the entire time. But if you see, it's going to work for the first animation. If we maybe do jump, you're going to see, okay, air attack. So we know exactly what animation we need to play. And that's how we're going to do it. So we can come down here into our attack animation, okay? And then we say, okay, so we have our animation. We know what we need to play. Then we can just get our animated sprite dot play our animation just like this. Okay, so now if we go to our scene level and we click play, you're going to see that if we do this, it's going to play the single animation. Then it's going to freeze because we never change attack to false again, but we'll do that in just a second. But we'll see if we play again and we jump and we do it, we're going to play that animation. And if we right click, you're going to see that we're going to play our double animation, right? Just like we're supposed to. So now we're going to have to somehow set our current attack to equal false again so that we can't play our attack animation, or so that we start playing our weapon idle, weapon run, and weapon fall again, right? So to do that, we can go to our animated sprite, we can send a signal animation finished, send that to the player, and then within this we can just say, well, okay, current attack is going to be equal to false. And then if we click play, you're going to see that everything should work. Stage level, we have our fall animation, we get set back to normal, we have a single animation, we have a double animation, and it works both ways, right? Looks good, but our fall animation looks a little funny because we sit here at the ground for a minute. So to fix that, we can just speed it up. We can go to our player, go to our animated sprite, go to our air attack here and set to 5 frames a second. Go click play, and you're going to see that that's going to look a little bit better now, right? All right, so that looks good. Now, what I want to go over is I want to go over some collisions and an error that we are going to have because we never flip our collision, right? So if we go and we click play in our stage level, you're going to see that our collision, this is our attack collision, the one on the right, it never flips. So if we're attacking this way, well, it's still going to be attacking on this side, right? So how are we going to flip that? Well, we have up here our flip toggle, which is going to be our toggle animation flip, which is going to be for our animated sprite. So to do that, since we got our deal damage zone, we can say, okay, well, deal damage zone dot scale dot x is going to equal -1. And what this is going to do is it's going to flip it, right? So it's going to flip the -x. So if we want it to be flipped, then we need it to equal -1. If we don't want it to be flipped, then we need it to equal +1. So up here, we do not want it to be flipped because we're moving right, so we equal it to 1. Up here, we do want it to be flipped, so we equal it to -1, so we are facing the other way. If we go to our stage level, we click we click play, you're going to see that it kind of flips as the player goes along now, right? And it's always set to true, or it's always set to enabled, which will change here in just a minute. But I want to go over that right now. So let's cover how this is going to turn off and turn back on based on what animation we are currently playing. So to do that, we can go to our player and we can say, okay, we need to toggle our damage collisions, right? So we need to go up here into our attack, and right after we play our animation, then we can call this function, which is going to be our toggle damage collisions, and then we can pass through our attack type, so we know what attack type we're going to be calling, right? And then we can create this function here by saying function. And just so this is easier to read, I want to actually change the name here, and I want to say that this is going to be the current attack. So instead of never mind, I guess we could leave it to attack type because it doesn't really matter. But yeah, we'll leave it for attack type. Maybe you want to call it current attack just so it's easier to read, because we're going to say, well, if current attack is equal to air, but we'll just say if attack type. So we're going to set some variables. We're going to first of all have our damage, damage zone collision, and that is going to be equal to the dill damage zone dot get node the collision shape 2D, so we can enable it and disable it, right? Okay, and then we're going to have a wait time variable, which is going to, for now, just be set to a float, and we're going to change this because it's going to be a different wait time for each animation. This is how long the animation is going to be enabled for, right? So we can start off by saying, okay, well, if attack type is equal to the air attack, then what do we want to happen? Well, we can set our wait time to equal however many seconds it may be. So let's say, okay, for an air attack, let's go over here to our animated sprite. Let's see, so animated sprite down here, and you're going to see our air attack is going to be 4 frames at 5 frames a second. So what does that mean? So, okay, well, let's think about it. Well, it's going to be our frames, it's going to be our frames divided by our frames a second, and that's going to be, so this frame here is going to last 0.8 seconds, right? So it's going to last 0.8 seconds. So that's how long we want our base wait time to be, and we can always come back and change this to fit it a little bit more better. But you can say, okay, well, it'd be 0.8 seconds because at 5 frames a second for 4 frames to finish, well, at 4 frames a second, it'd be 1 second. If we go up 1, then it's going to be 0.2 less, so it's going to be 0.8, right? And then we can say, and you'd get that by saying 4 divided by 5, right? So 4 divided by 5 is 0.8, so that's what this is going to be. Then we can say, okay, well, else if attack type is equal to single, then we want wait time to equal whatever it may be. So if we go to our single attack, you're going to see that it's going to be 6 frames at 15 frames a second. That's going to be a little harder to do the math off the top of our head. So to do that, we can, let me grab a calculator. I'm doing this on a different monitor, but I'll pull it over here in just a minute. So you see that we have a calculator, and we can say, okay, well, we have 15, or we have wait, what? It was 6 frames, right? So 6 frames. Yeah, okay, so it's 6 frames at 15 frames a second. So 6 frames divided by 15 is going to equal, okay, 0.4 seconds. So we can say, okay, wait time is going to equal 0.4. And then we can say else if attack type is equal to double, then we want it wait time to equal to, it'd be 9 frames at 13 frames a second. So we can say, okay, 9 frames divided by 13, and it'd be about, I guess, 0.7 seconds, right? So we can say, okay, wait time for double is going to be 0.7. I feel like for some reason, even though the animation is that long, I feel like it's going to be a lot shorter, but we'll see whenever we get everything set and done. Okay, but that looks good. Now we're going to grab our variable that we created up here, our deal damage, and we're going to turn it to disabled to equal false so that it is enabled. So we can say damage zone collision dot disabled is going to equal false. just like this. And then we can say, we can create a little timer here, and we can say, okay, await get tree dot create timer. So it's going to be an encode timer. We want to set the wait time to our wait time variable, so it's different for each different animation. And then we can say, okay, well, looks good. And then we can set our collision back to disabled, so it's no longer enabled. So it's going to turn on and then turn back off, right? So if we go over here to our collision shape, let's actually turn it to disabled off of start, and then we can save the scene, and we can go to our stage level. We can click play, and we can, okay, so it's disabled. If we do a single attack, it enables. If we do a double attack, it enables for longer. If we do an air attack, you're going to see the air attack, it does enable for way too long, so we can go change that. But the other ones look pretty good, right? Okay, so that works. Let's go to our player. Let's go to our air attack, and let's just change it down to 6. Okay, so that works. Everything looks good. Now, if we need to set up a variable so we know how much damage we're doing for each attack, right? So air attack, single attack, double attack, they're all going to be different amounts of damage. So to fix this, we can say, well, okay, let's set our global variable. Let's create a global variable, and we're going to set a damage amount to however amount it is, right? So we can go to our global script. We can create some more variables. We're going to create 2 more here. We're going to say, okay, well, var player damage zone is going to be equal to an area 2D, and this is going to be for our enemy, so our enemy can find the player zone. Then we can say, okay, player damage amount is going to be equal to whatever we set here in just a minute. Player damage zone here, we're going to set in the player's physics process function. So we can go back to our player. Up here in the physics process where we set these other 2 animation, or this other animation, we can say global dot player damage zone is going to equal that of our deal damage zone, just like this, right? And then we can come down here and we can create a new function, which is going to be the function for our setting our damage, right? So if we come up here, we're going to call it right before we call our attack animation, right? So, okay, we set our attack type. Now we need to decide how much. We need to set that global variable to the attack amount for single, double, or air attack. So to do that, we can say, okay, well, let's get our, let's call another function, which is going to be called damage, just so we can keep everything organized. And we can say attack type, attack type, just like this. Then we can create this function down here at the bottom, and we can say function. Okay, I don't know why we're dragged all the way over like this, but we need to say function set damage attack type, and inside of this we're basically going to say, I'll go through this a little quicker and I'll explain it at the end, but we'll say, okay, var current damage is going to equal our current damage to deal is going to be equal to an int, and we'll set that here in just a second. We'll say, okay, well, if attack type is equal to single, then we need to say current damage to deal is going to be equal to, we'll say for a single attack we'll do 8 damage. Then we have else if attack type is equal to double, then we can say current damage to deal is going to be equal to, well, let's say a single is 8 damage, then maybe a double, since it's 2 swings, it can be double that, so it can be 16. Then we can say one more, else if attack type is equal to our air animation, then we can say, okay, well, current damage to deal is going to be equal to 20, right? So our air attack is going to be the worst, right? It's going to be the most powerful attack. Then we can say, okay, well, global dot player damage amount equals current damage to deal. So now that global script is set to this, and then we'll be able to get this whenever we enter the zone, right? So whenever our enemy enters the zone, we are going to be able to say, okay, the enemy is going to be able to pull that global script and say, okay, this is how much damage we need to deal, because that's the attack that was called from the player script, right? So now we're going to move into how the bat's going to take damage and how the bat is going to be able to have a dying animation, take damage animation, and stuff like that. So let's get into that now. Okay, so to get started with our bat taking damage and receiving those numbers from the player and receiving that from the player and being able to process it within its own function, we're going to have to create some scripts off this bat or off the start in our bat script. So this is our bat enemy. This is our script of our bat enemy. We're going to come up here to the top. We're going to create a bunch of variables, right? So just like, I mean, it's not a bunch, but we're going to have health, which is going to be 50. We're going to have var health max, which is going to end up being used later. So health max is going to equal 50, and then our var health min is going to equal 0. And this is stuff that's going to be used later on in the series, right? But we are going to have another variable, which is going to be variable dead, and for now that's going to be equal to false, right? So because off spawn, the bat should be alive, right? So it shouldn't be dead. Then we're going to have var taking damage, which is going to be equal to false off the start because it's not going to be taking damage the moment it spawned in. And we're going to have var is roaming, which is going to be a boolean, so we know we can just double check to make sure our player is roaming whenever we die, so we don't have to loop the animation over and over, and I'll explain that whenever we get to it. But our bat is going to have some way to receive that enemy or to check if that area 2D is within its area 2D, which is going to be in the name of a hitbox. So we can go to our bat enemy, we can add in an area 2D. We can name this area 2D our bat hitbox, and we can add in a collision shape 2D. This is going to be a circle, and it's going to basically just be around our bat, just like this. So the hitbox is the one that's just a tiny bit bigger than the collision. So that's going to be our hitbox. Then we can signal a area entered into our bat script from our hitbox. So whenever an area is entered, we can say, okay, well, let's figure out what is going on. What has entered the area, right? Well, we can say, okay, so if area enters the hitbox, so we can say something like, we're going to create a variable, which is going to be our damage variable. So we'll be able to say if area is equal to the global dot player damage zone. So if it's the same area 2D entering the zone, which is the player's damage zone, then we can say, okay, well, let's create a variable damage. Let's set damage to equal global dot player damage amount, right? Which we changed in our player script. So now our damage is going to equal the damage amount based on whatever animation the player is doing or whatever attack. Then we can say, okay, well, whoops, let's push this in like this, and then we can say, okay, well, take damage, right? So let's set the variable, and then we'll call it take damage function, which is going to be a function that we have to create, and then we'll pass through our damage variable, right? Okay, so within this function, we can copy this, and we can say function and create a new function. And for now, we can pass. Let's go up here. We have to put a colon at the end of that, so it is a completed if statement. Okay, so now in our take damage function, we're gonna have to go through some stuff. We just made a health function, or we just made a health variable and everything. So we can say, okay, well, take damage. The first thing we're gonna do is want to take damage from our health. So we can say health minus equals whatever the damage amount is. Then we can say we can change taking damage to equal to true, because now we are currently taking damage. So if we're currently taking damage, what are we going to have to do? Well, we're going to end up pausing our movement and stuff like that. We're not going to pause our movement, but we're going to pause our animations, right? So because we're going to play a hurt animation, but we'll go over that in a minute. So we can say, okay, taking damage, and then we can say, we'll check if the player or if the enemy has died. So if the bat has died, we can say health is going to, or if health is less than or equal to 0, then we want to set health to equal to 0. And then we want to say dead is equal to true. And then we want to, and then for now we can print a string out here, which is just going to be just for testing. So we can say print self, and then we're going to print, so basically it's going to say, okay, this entity's current health is, and that's going to be equal to their health variable. So we'll just print it out in the output so we can kind of see each bat's health and what the health of those bats are, so we can make sure everything is working how it's supposed to be working, right? Because we don't have health bars yet, which we're going to end up adding in a later episode. But what I wanted to talk about is that we need to change the move function up completely now, because we have to, you know, account for those two important variables that we just created, which are the dead variable and the taking damage variable. So we're going to go up here to our move, and most of this is going to be changed. So first of all, this is movement, right? So if movement, we want to say, okay, well, if the bat is not dead. So if the bat is not dead, then we can call all of this, right? So if the bat is alive, then we're able to move. And we can come down here to the very bottom and we can say else if the bat is dead. So if the bat is dead, then we want to create a falling animation. So we just want the bat to completely just fall straight towards the ground. So to do that, we can say velocity dot y is going to plus equal 10, and we can times that by a delta. And then that's just kind of gravity that's going to bring it down to the ground slowly. Then we can say velocity dot x is going to equal 0, so we can't move side to side if the player or if the enemy is dead. And then later we'll check if it's on the ground and remove it from the scene, right? But up here we have to have one more thing. Okay, so if we're moving and our bat's not dead, then we want to set our is roaming variable to true, right? Because okay, well the bat is roaming, so we can say okay, well is roaming is going to equal true because our bat is roaming, so that's going to be true, right? And then we'll check if it's false or true later, and we'll change it to false so that whenever our player does die, we can change it to false, and it's going to say it's going to not loop our animation over. But I know that's not making much sense now. It's going to make sense when we get to it. But we say, okay, well, if our player's not dead, then we're roaming. So let's set that to true. And then we need another thing. We're going to have to say, well, before we play our movement animation, we need to check if our bat is taking damage. So we can say, well, okay, if we're not taking damage and we are in bat chase, then we can follow the bat. Okay, so down here we have else if not equal to bat chase. So basically this is our free roam movement. This is how we free roam around the map. So we can say, okay, well, we're going to have to change this up a little bit because we're going to have to say, we're going to make this just an else statement. So if it doesn't meet the taking damage and we're not in bat chase, then we're going to just free roam, right? Because we're not taking, I guess if we are taking damage, then we wouldn't be in bat chase anyway, but because if we are in bat chase, that means the player's alive. But so basically, if we're not taking damage and we're in bat chase and we're following the player, then we're going to do this script, right? But if we are not following the player, then we are going to do this script, which is just going to move us randomly. So we can say maybe else not taking damage so that we're free roaming if we're not taking damage. You could do that if you wanted to. It doesn't really matter, because it should work the exact same if we just do it like an else statement. But then I want to go in here and I want to add some sort of movement to our enemy if we are taking damage, right? So we can say, okay, well, else if we are taking damage, right? Because if we are taking damage and it just plays an animation, it's going to look a little funny, right? If it's still following our player. So we can say, okay, well, if we're going to stop this movement here, and we are taking damage, we don't want it to free roam, because if we are taking damage and we are in bat chase, then it's not going to match this criteria, and it's going to match the else criteria. So we're just going to end up free roaming. It's going to look funny. So we're going to say, okay, well, we are taking damage. What happens if we are taking damage? Well, we're going to create a knockback movement. We can say, okay, var knockback direction is going to equal the position dot direction to our player dot position, right? And we can times that by however much we want. We can change this later. For now, we'll go to 50, and we can change it lower or higher based on how much knockback we want. But you can see that we set the player up here in this movement, so it should pass down through here, because this is going to happen before we ever take damage in the game. Then we can say, okay, well, a simple little code. We can say velocity equals just the knockback direction, just like that, and then that should work. Now, if we test play, everything should technically work for the most part. We're just going to have to change up a few things. But you can see, okay, well, our bat, they're not currently in bat chase. But if we do hit it, it does not work. So we can say, okay, well, let's see what's going on here. Position.direction to player. So we're getting a position.null, which means there is no current position. And I'll tell you why that is. So that is because we never ever in our game, since the bat was never set to bat chase, we never ever set it here. So if we take this and we move it to the top of our move function, just like this, and we say, okay, well, player equals it there, then it's going to be called before this as well, and it's going to be called before this. So it's going to be called no matter what. So now if we go and we click play, you're going to see that if we play and we somehow, if we hopefully the enemy comes down here and we hit the enemy, it should, you can kind of see that it is taking damage, right? So it prints it. Okay, well, it's 42 now it's 22, now it's 2, because those were 2 flying attacks that we hit, but we hit it at the start with just a normal attack. But let's go to our let's go up here to our ready and let's set this to true so we can actually have the bats coming towards us. So now our bat chase is equal to true, so they're going to follow us. If we hit the bat, you see that it gets knocked back. It gets knocked back pretty far, and it's never going to stop getting knocked back. And why is that? Well, let's figure out. So that is because our taking damage is always set to true, and we never set it to false. So to set this to false, we can come down here and create a in our animation controller, which is going to be our handle animation here. Now we're gonna have to change this up pretty much a lot too, basically the entire thing. So basically we can say, okay, well, var animated sprite, that has to stay because that's our animated sprite. But first of all, if we wanted to play the flying animation, well, what needs to be true to play the flying animation? Well, our player needs to be not dead. So if our player is not dead and we're not taking damage, then we want to play the flying animation, and then we can put in our flipping the sprite here, right? So it's going to flip it left or right depending on the direction. We can put that there as well. Then we can create an else if. So we can say, okay, else if the enemy is not dead and is taking damage, then we're going to want to play our damage function, right? So we can say, okay, well, animated sprite dot play the hurt animation, right? And then we can say, okay, well, let's create a timer so we can play that full animation all the way through. Then we can say, okay, get tree dot create timer, and then our wait time, which for now we can set to 1 second timeout, and then we have to figure out exactly how much wait time we need for that function. But then we can say, okay, well, after the animation finishes, we can set taking damage to equal to false again. So the knockback will stop and the enemy in its taking damage state will stop. Then there's also going to be one more thing, if our enemy is dead. So basically else if our enemy is dead and we are roaming. So if our enemy's dead but we're still roaming, then we want to say, okay, well, is roaming is going to equal false. So then that's going to stop all the movement. So the bat's going to stop movement. If the bat is dead, the bat will stop moving. So we can say, okay, is roaming equals false. And then we can also say, okay, animated sprite dot play our death animation, just like this. Then we can go, okay, well, let's go to our bat real quick and let's get our bat animated sprite. Let's get our hurt animation. It's 4 frames at 5 frames a second. So that's going to end up being 0.8 seconds long. So we can say 0.8. So that's how long the animation is going to last. Then we can go to our stage level, we click play, and now the bat should be able to die. If we look at our output down here, you kind of see, okay, well, that's bat 2. Its health is equal to 42. We hit it again. This is bat 1 is going to be equal to 42. That's bat 1 is going to be equal to 26 because we hit it with a double attack. We hit that one with a double attack. Let's hit it with an air attack. You're going to see this bat's going to end up dying. This bat is going to end up taking the bat with it because their collisions are still enabled. But you kind of see how they hit the ground. And they don't hit the ground, but they hit on this thing. And you're going to see that they never despawn. But you can kind of see how the health went down for different amounts for each different attack that we did. But if we play it one more time, you're going to see that, okay, well, boom. Let's get this guy again. Get this guy again. And then get him again. He's going to end up dying. And he's going to stay there on the ground, which is not going to look right. But we can fix that by... Okay, now they're both dead. But it works, and the enemies are dying, and we're playing the correct amount of damage based on what attack we are doing as the player. And then you're going to see that they're going to sit here. That's because these collisions are still interacting with the polygon, with the bat-only collision. So to change that, we can actually change that and change the collisions completely based on the death animation. So if we go back to our bat, and we say, okay, well, if we have to play the death animation, that means the player is dead. So we can set some collision layers. We can say set collision layer value. We're going to set one value to equal true so that it interacts with the same collisions as the player is interacting with. And then we're going to set the collision layer value 2 to equal false, right? So basically, if we go to our bat enemy, we go to our inspector and we go to our collisions, you can kind of see that the 2 and 2 is the collisions that are interacting with our scene levels polygon collision, right? Because this is the collision polygon here that we have selected. It's mask layer 2, right? So our bat is interacting with that. If we change that to equal to 1, then it's only going to interact. It's not going to interact with that, and it's going to basically not even picture that there because they're not on the same collision layer. It's going to end up saying, okay, well, let's interact with layer 1, which is going to end up going down and hitting the same ground that the player is interacting with, because the player and the ground are set to layer 1. And then we're also going to say set collision mask to true for 1, and then set collision mask to false for 2. And then now that should work. So now if we go to the stage level, we click play, and you're gonna kind of see if they come down to the ground, they're gonna hit this wall, and that's as low as they can go, right? But if we take these guys out, right, he's gonna end up dying, and he's gonna fall all the way down to the ground, right? While this guy, see, he's on the ground now, but this guy is going to be able to only go this low. The moment he dies, he'll be able to sink below that, and he's gonna lay on the ground just like that. So to make these guys disappear now, we can say, okay, well, let's first go to our debugger and let's turn off visible collision shapes just so we can see our game a little bit better once we finish this. Then we're going to go into our physics process, or into our process function here on our bat enemy, and we can say something like, okay, well, if is on the floor. So if our enemy is on the floor and we are dead, then that means we're dead and we're on the ground. So that means we're on the very, very ground, and we want to get rid of the bat. So we can say, okay, get tree. However long we want the bat to sit there, because maybe we want it to sit there for a minute, so maybe we'll do like 3 seconds. It can sit on the ground. Then we can say dot timeout, and then we can just say self dot queue free. Now this right here, this is the spot that we're going to end up calling our change the score of the game. So when we change the score, we'll end up calling it right here within our bat enemy. But if we go to our stage level, we click play, you're going to see that we have 2 bats, and we can attack these guys, basically. Like, we should be able to attack them, and they have knockback, and they fly back based on if they're hit or not. And then once they eventually die, so I'm doing single attack, so it's going to take a while. Okay, but that one bugged out. I don't know why he bugged out. This one did not bug out. That one worked right. If we play it again, maybe that was just a one-time bug. Let's see. So double attack, he's going to fly back. Let's do an air attack. He's got hit. Air attack, they both got hit. He's going to end up dying. He's going to end up falling down. And then if we take this guy out, you're going to see that he's going to end up falling down. They're going to lay on the ground for 3 seconds. He's going to disappear. Now he's going to lay on the ground for 3 seconds. He's going to then disappear. And then we're out of bats. But you can kind of see how we can play all of our animations still. Everything works. And that can happen for infinite amount of bats. So however many bats we have on our game, that is going to work just the same. So now that it works, our bat can now chase us and die based on if our player attacks it. Our player can do different attack amounts based on what animation is played, and that works perfectly good. Since we have already made our players attack towards the enemy, now we're going to make the enemies attack towards the player, and it's going to be a little repetitive to what we've already covered, so I'm going to move through it just a tad bit quicker, but I'll still show every step to create it. So let's begin with creating our enemy attack towards our player. So to get started, I want to create some more global scripts. I want to go to our global.gd, and I want to create some bat scripts that are some bat variables that we're going to end up using. So we're going to say, okay, well, first we're going to need our bats damage zone, which we'll create, which is going to end up being a area 2D. And we also bat damage zone, and then we're also going to want a variable for our bat damage amount. So we can say bat damage amount, because we're going to have multiple enemies, so you'll have a different damage amount and a different damage zone for every single enemy. And then we'll also create up here another player variable, which is just going to be var player alive, which is going to be a boolean, so either true or false. And then I'm going to fix up some stuff here in bat. So whoops, I accidentally put equal signs down here instead of a colon like that. Okay, and then we can go to our bat scene, and in our bat scene I want to first create an area 2D, because we're going to need an area 2D. And this area 2D is going to be for our bat's deal damage area. So we can say bat deal damage area, just like this. And then we can add in a collision shape 2D. And this collision shape here is going to be a circle, and it's going to be just a tad bit bigger than the rest of these here. But it's going to be the area that the bat can deal damage to our player within. So something just like this, right? Maybe a little smaller, something like this. And then we can go into our script, and inside of our script, we're going to actually add a class name up here, which we should have done a while ago, but we'll say class name bat enemy, right? and that's going to be our class name. And then we're also going to create a new variable. This variable is going to be our damage to deal. So however much damage our bat is going to deal, that is what that is going to be equal to. So maybe we can say, well, we want it to be equal to 20. We want our bat to deal 20 damage, right? And then in process, we're just going to connect some of these things to our or to our global variable. So we can say, okay, global bat damage amount is going to equal the damage to deal, and then we can say global dot bat damage zone is going to be equal to the bat damage zone that we just created, so bat damage area, just like so. And then that's all that we're going to have to do in the player for now. Now we're going to move, all right, that's all we have to do in the bat for now. Now we're going to move to the player, and in the player, firstly, I want to add in a hitbox, so we can say, okay, area 2D, and we can name this our player hitbox, like so. And then we can add in a collision 2D, and this collision is going to be a capsule, and this capsule is going to just fit around our player just like this in the middle of our player. Something like that looks good, right? Because this is the middle, so whenever he flip-flops, he's going to be more on this side of it, but this is how we're going to go with it, right? And then we're going to go into our player script, and in our script I want to create some variables up here, and these variables are going to be our health variables. So we can say var health is going to equal 100, var health max is going to equal 100, var health min is going to equal 0, and then we can say var can take damage is going to be a boolean, which we'll set here in just a minute, right? And then we're going to want to go into our physics process, and we're going to want to call a function. So this is the hitbox that we just created, and it's an area. We're also going to want to create one more variable, and we're going to want to create var dead. So this is going to check if our player is dead, and at spawn we can set this to be a bool, but this is going to be in our ready function. We're going to set this to equal to false, right? So we're going to say, okay, dead is going to equal false, and we're also going to say can take damage is going to be equal to true, right? Because can take damage when we first spawn is going to equal true, and our dead is going to equal false when we first spawn, because we're not going to be dead. But then we want to go in here and we want to move all of this into a function, right? We want to say, okay, well, up here, if we are not dead, so if our player is not dead and dead is equal to false, then we are going to be able to have well, I guess we would want gravity anyway, but we'd want it here, right? So that everything can be under this if function, the if input that is action pressed, right? So basically, if we want to jump, that needs to be under if we're not dead. So if we're not dead, then we can jump. Same with everything else. So this is basically all of our movement. We want to only be able to move if we're not dead. We want to only be able to attack if we're not dead. Just like that. And then we also are going to want to only be able to handle animation if we're not dead. We are going to leave the move and slide within our outside of our if not dead, but we'll get, because we want to be able to play animations and kind of move around if we want to animate our character towards the end after he is dead, right? So we can leave that outside just like that. And then down here at the bottom, we can say check hitbox. We want to make sure that this is inside of our dead area, right? So we can say, okay, check hitbox like so. And then we're going to create this function. Now this function is going to basically check our hitbox for overlapping bodies, and this is going to be a pretty it's going to be a pretty function. It's going to look good, right? Because it's going to check the hitbox area. So basically, if we say, okay, well, var hitbox areas, we're going to get the overlapping areas that are overlapping our player's hitbox. So we can say, okay, player hitbox dot get overlapping areas, right? And then we can say we need a damage variable, which we'll set based on whatever entity is damaging our player. Then we can say, okay, if hitbox areas, right? So if there are hitbox areas, then we can say, okay, var hitbox, so we'll just grab the first hitbox in our array of areas, whatever's in our, or on top of our player's hitbox, we can get that, and we can just grab the very first one, right? So if there's multiple of them, it won't matter. We'll just take whatever the very first hitbox is. So we can say, okay, areas dot front, we'll grab the front one. And then we can say, okay, if hitbox dot get parent is part of that class name that we just created. So if the parent of a area that enters our zone is a bat enemy, right? Then we can say, okay, well, let's set our damage to whatever the bat's damage is based on that global variable. So we can say, okay, bat damage amount. So then basically if we have infinite amount of enemies, we can say, okay, if hitbox that get parent is equal, or else if hitbox that get parent is equal to frog enemy, damage equals global.frog enemy damage, right? So we can change it based on what entity is damaging our player, right? And then down here we can skip a line outside of our if statements, and we can say, okay, if we are allowed to take damage, right? So because we're gonna have a cooldown, but if we are allowed to take damage, then we want to take damage, and we want to take the damage amount by that variable that we just created. Okay, now in our take damage function, right? So in our take damage function, what are we going to want to do? Well, first of all, let's just throw in a test here and let's see how everything works. So let's print tests, and then let's also print our damage amount to make sure we're passing everything through correctly, right? So this should only be called, let's see, you're gonna see whenever the enemy's over it, watch, the enemy's over it, we have 20 damage. When we're off of it, 0, 20, 0, 20, 0, 20, 0, 20, 0, 20, 0, right? So it resets. And the only time we have damage is if the bat is on top of our player. So the bat deals 20 damage to our player now. That may be a lot, but we can leave that for now. But maybe we'll change it down to 10 later. But we can say, okay, well, that works, right? So what are we going to want to do within our take damage function? First of all, I want to set our down here in our take damage, I guess I was going to set our global.playerAlive, but we'll do that towards the end because we're going to end up having an error since our global.playerAlive has never been called. We'll have an error later on, but we'll mess with that whenever that error pops up. That's going to be whenever our player dies, right? So because whenever our player dies, our bat enemy won't be able to find our player because our player is not going to be in the scene tree, right? So for now, we can go and create our take damage function. Now, what are we going to want in our take damage function? Well, we're going to have to say, okay, well, let's say, okay, if health is greater than 0, then we want to say health minus equals whatever damage is equal to. And then we can print player health, and then we can print the health of our player just so we can see what it equals to every time it changes. Then we can check if our player is dead. So we can say if health is greater than or equal to 0, then health is going to equal 0. And then we can say dead is going to equal true. We can change our global variable that we had a while back and say global.playerAlive that we just created equals false. And then we can make sure we set this variable to true in our ready function. Have we already? No, we haven't. So let's set this to true in our ready function. Just like this. And then we can come down here, back to our script, or back to our take damage script here. And then we can say, okay, well, now we want to basically, right here, we'll handle our death animation. So we'll come back to this, but we'll say handle death animation. This is where we're going to do that at. And then out of that if statement there, we want to take damage cooldown. And we can say, okay, we want to cool down by 1 second. So we want our take damage cooldown to be 1 second. To create this, we can say function take damage cooldown and then wait time. And then this is going to be a very, very simple function. We're just going to say can take damage equals false. And then we're going to say await get tree dot create timer wait time dot timeout, and then we can say take damage equals back to true, right? So basically we won't be taking damage over and over and over and over. We'll only take damage when we are allowed to take damage, if that makes sense. So we need to make sure damage is equal to something before we call everything here, right? Because if not, then we're going to be looping this over and over, even if we're just taking 0 damage, right? Because we take 0 damage if we're overlapping an area. So we need to, before we go into here, we need to check something. We need to say, okay, if damage is not equal to 0, right? So if damage is not equal to 0, that means it's going to be something, some entity is over it, and then we can push all this within it like this, and then this should all work now, right? So that should work better. And then this handle death animation, this is just where we're going to call our death animation. And to do this, we can take this away, we can call it, and we can create this function. And this function is going to be a function handle death animation. And how are we going to handle this? Well, we can just say, okay, animated sprite dot play death animation. And then maybe we can create a little quick timer here just so we can see our death animation play out. We could say maybe 3.5, and then we can say self dot queue free like this. Now if we go to our stage level, you'll see that down here it'll print out our player's health every 20 health because the bat will damage it. If we get hit again, we're going to end up dying. It's going to zoom in onto our player. You're going to see him do the death animation. It's not really going to zoom in because we haven't set that up, but we are going to get an error. And the reason that we're going to get an error is because once our player is queue freed from our path, we don't know what we're looking for in our enemy screen or in our enemy's script, right? So we have no idea what we're doing. So to do this, we can go in here and we can just say, okay, well, if not taking damage and is bat chase and global dot player alive is equal to true, then that should fix that. But I also want to go over one more thing in here. I want to go up to our process function. I want to kind of set something modular for the rest of the bat script and say, okay, well, if global.player alive is equal to true, then bat chase is equal to true, right? And then else if global.player alive, well, I guess not global.player alive. So if it's equal to false, then we can say bat chase equals false, just like this. And that's going to be a little bit more modular. Now if we go play, you're going to see what happens. We're going to get hit by our bat multiple times until we end up dying. And then we're going to die, and the bats are going to now free roam. And you're going to see how that looks. Now I want to do a quick little animation. Now you can do this, but this is just kind of customization. I'm going to go down here into our death animation function. And I'm just going to make a couple of changes to our game, right? So in our handle death, I want to go over some stuff. So the game works as it should now. I just want to kind of change up some stuff here. So whenever we go here, you kind of see how our player was off the ground, right? So to do that, if we push our collision up, then it's not going to do that, right? So we can say, okay, well, let's just get our player collision shape and say position.y is equal to 5, right? So then that's going to push it up 5. So then our player is going to sit lower down because the collision is higher up on the player, if that makes sense, right? So that we can do that just to make a couple hard-coded changes here. And then we can set this timer here to maybe 0.5 so it starts to play the animation. Then we want to zoom in the camera, right? So we can say, okay, so in half a second after our death animation plays, we can say camera 2D dot zoom dot x equals 4, and then we can say camera 2D dot zoom dot y equals 4. So we zoom in both ways. Then we can create a timer. We can sit there for 3.5 seconds, and then we can queue free our player. So now this should work. So if we join our game, you're going to see that we are able to attack our enemies. My goal is to, let's kill one of them. Okay, see, we killed the bat. The bat is now gone. The bat falls to the ground. The bat's going to disappear after a certain amount of time. If we get hit by this bat here, we're going to end up dying, and something is not going to work, right? But that is because we spelt position wrong, which is a minor error, an upsetting error, but you can kind of see that if we get hit again. Let's take one of these guys out, hopefully, maybe. Okay, we got one of them. Let's see what happens whenever our player gets taken out. Death animation's played, and you see it zooms in, and then once he queue frees, we have no camera in this scene. But really, whenever that happens, we're going to say, okay, well, let's go back to the lobby scene, and we'll restart on the lobby scene. But we're going to go over that in a future episode. So that works. We can attack our player. Our players can now kill our player, and we can also kill the bats. And that is everything that should happen in this game, which is perfect, and that looks amazing. So I wanted to thank you for watching. I hope this video was able to help you create some sort of combat system within your game, or if you're following along with the series, then I hope you had a good experience with this episode and you're able to move on to the next episode and create what we're going to create next, which is going to be super exciting. So I can't wait to see you then. Until then, stay safe and have a wonderful day. Remember, if you have any questions, then please let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, stay safe and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Bye bye.